Welcome back to Tawana Talks, where I believe leadership is a dance everyone's invited to, even you with two left feet. Each week is a new track where we are chatting about the moves you make to lead yourself and others to success. So lace up those dancing shoes and let's dive into creating those supportive steps together. Ready to move with purpose? Let's hit the dance floor.
All right. Thank you for tuning in to Tawana Talks. I am Tawana and I am excited and honored to introduce my guest today. I have the fabulous Mrs. Gwen Harris, who is a mental health professional with a diverse background spanning in clinical mental health counseling, military leadership, early childhood education, and organizational management. Gwen is the founder, COO, and community partnership program director at the FACTS Initiative. She is a Major and Medical Service Corps officer in the Army Reserve and serves as an adult adjunct faculty teaching military leadership at UNCC. That I did not know. Gwen is also the founder of NSYNC Couples Retreat, which is an intensive marriage group counseling experience designed to increase marital connection. And might I add, she is a phenomenal wife, a mother, a clubhouse nurturer, which we can talk about a little bit later. And Gwen, I am just pleased and honored to talk with you today. Your work in therapy and support is definitely truly evident. So let's start with like your journey. Like, what inspired you to pursue this path?
That is such a tricky question. I did not take a traditional path, and it kind of leads to the fact that I was a little bit going with the flow of things and not making real choices. When I was younger, I always I always had a passion for mental health since I was a kid. Um, and I will never forget the moment when I was 10 years old and my mom was washing the dishes and I was sitting at the table doodling. And she asked me, had my grandfather ever done anything inappropriate to me? And I spent a lot of time at my grandfather's house. I had an aunt that was my age, so I spent a lot of time with her. And I thought my mom was insane. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, why would you ask me this weird question? Um, and I looked at her and I saw how serious she was. And I was like, what, like, really, where's this coming from? And so she explained to me like some of the traumatic things that she experienced in her childhood as a result of my grandfather. And so, I'm like, absolutely not. This has never happened, which it hadn't happened. Um, and it in that moment there was so many aspects of my mother that instantly made sense. Like I wasn't allowed to sit on my dad's lap, and like there was all of these little things that she would allow or wouldn't allow, or ways that she was that made a lot of sense to me just in that moment. And I always kind of became interested with like why people are the way that they are, or what leads to decisions, or what leads to certain behaviors. Um, and the army part just happened because I was in school and I was in JROTC and I liked it. My brother was in the army. The recruiter was there talking to me. And nobody was talking to me about college. I was a honor society student and nobody was talking to me about college, but they were talking to me about the army. And I was like, oh, I can do this. I know I can do this. And so it led me that on that path, which I have no regrets at all about it. But it led me down that path. And even I started school when I was in the army, and there was no question what you wanted, what you want your major to be, psychology. Like there's nothing else. But here I am, an active duty soldier. Like, no, psychology. That's what I want to do.
Wow, I think that's just a phenomenal story and has so many different layers. First of all, that makes sense. That not necessarily makes sense, but now knowing your rich history and military background, which I did not know, when I see you, your husband and Zach in your fatigue pants and the shirt, like it's so cute. And I'm like, oh, I just thought your husband had background in military. I didn't know you did as well. And so now I'm like, oh, this is a truly a military family going on here. But then also just when you speak about your understanding of like why people behave the way they do, I think we share that in common is um, that's that empathetic nature of I really want to engage and know like why you make these decisions. And I've seen it from you firsthand. And so going to that clubhouse nurture for the audience listening, we have something in church called clubhouse, and those are for the staff and the volunteers, children, to be able to be nurtured and be in an environment while we're serving, to be taken care of, and knowing that our children are not knowing our children are being taken care of and we don't have to worry, so that we can do the things that we're doing. And Gwen and I have interacted with each other and met each other through that nurturing environment where my daughter has just, I don't even know the word for it, but she has really stamped her mark and, created her territory there. But Gwen is one who definitely recognizes and identifies who she is as a person, and her desires and needs, as well as all of the other children in there. And I've seen you show up tremendously. And I never have a communicative problem of like what's going on with her, because you really are engaged with those children, and realizing that you have a background in working with children, and then finding out later that you were a counselor and a therapist. And I was like, oh, okay, well, this makes so much sense. So, and then you have your little one who he just turned 2, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm interested in knowing like in your experience, or just in your everyday life, and not necessarily your professional experience, but also in your personal experience. How does that show up on a consistent basis when you're working to identify why and how people behave? How does that show up in the types of environments that you create for that?
Yeah. So I think, well, that being just a part of me, the profession is, I chose the profession because that was a part of me. And so it is everywhere and everything that I do. And even, and I've learned some lessons in life that even in just day to day interactions, I take it every single place with me.
Mhm.
And so whether it is in my friend groups, sometimes being a mediator, like, hey, she probably didn't mean this by this. Like, she's this type of person, and
Right.
she thinks this way. And so probably she was coming from this place. Um, or even just raising my kid, and just watching, trying, for me, with him being so young, trying to understand how he processes things.
Mhm.
Um, but and even sometimes it is everything sometimes can be a blessing and a curse. But I
Mhm.
think of how it shows up in my marriage, and sometimes I stop myself because I'm like, I know he's going to respond this way. And so maybe I won't say a thing, or maybe I won't do a thing. It shows up everywhere, everywhere and everything that I do, just because it's my nature,
Mhm.
in a sense.
Yeah,
I
no,
don't
that
know
makes perfect sense. Yeah,
if
no,
I
yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. I often say, I've said this on several occasions, like, I am who I am wherever I am, right?
Mhm.
And, I think sometimes people struggle with, in this place I have to be this, in this place I have to be this. Now, when I'm with my family and my friends, I'm a little bit more lax, but I still am who I am. I still show up as that same person. If I'm in a boardroom, obviously, I'm not as lax, but I still am who I am. And I think that's important. In season one, and I know that you had put a couple of episodes that were profound to you, and we had spoke about my sons. But in season one, there were a couple of episodes that you kind of were gearing towards, and so I'm going to just mention the title of them. If you remember, that's fine. If you don't, I'm going to kind of mention the title, and just want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into one of them that just sticks out to you. And so a couple that you mentioned were, one, I did a talk on, in order to teach them, you have to treat them. And that was geared around learning and leading in an environment. I don't need your help. And that was like learning to lead in leadership. And another was, should you, with question mark, asking permission, We're talking about, asking permission of those you are leading, if it's okay to even show up in that space to lead them. And then another, which I don't know why this one seems like one of my favorites, but don't pick it because it's my favorite. If it's yours, then that's fine too. But one of your little friends, and that's just talking about personal growth. You take control of where we want that conversation to go and which one you think stuck out more to you more.
Yeah, it's really tough to say this one more. I think it was each one in a different way.
Gotcha.
But just thinking of just the ones that I can recall the conversation the best to my mind. Oh my goodness, and I lost the title. It was the second to last one that you said. What did you
Um,
say?
you should you? You should, exclamation, should you, question mark.
Yeah, and this is the one where you were talking about with Tyler, and you were saying that like you felt like you had the answers, and she was saying like I have good ideas too. This is
Yeah, that
that
was like her
conversation.
artwork. And then when I was trying to tell her, I was like, wait, well, you should. And I was like, wait, actually, first of all, do you want to hear what I have to say? Like, let's start there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that helped. In all honesty, it helped me to reflect on my behavior a lot. Even just listening to it and understanding how I show up in a lot of spaces, and not necessarily something that I teach to other people, but something that I needed to hear for myself,
Mm,
which was one of the reasons that it stood out to me. Is that sometimes I can be a bit of an idea factory, and and some and naturally a problem solver, which is a blessing and a curse. So sometimes people can present something to me, and I will run it through in my mind, like let it play out to see how it'll go, and then I find the holes in it, and it's like, well, if you do this, you should make sure, and I that's my next, and like those are the next words that come out of my mouth.
yeah.
And so for me to even slow down to even say, do you want my advice? Like, what do you
Mhm.
want? What do you want from me in this interaction? Do you want me to just let you, affirm you, or what is it that you actually want? Because I can go straight into like, we're gonna do it. I'm happy. It's a good
Yeah.
idea. I don't necessarily say those things, but I just like, okay, we can make it great if we
Yeah.
fix these things. And sometimes
Yeah.
people don't want that, or sometimes it leaves people feeling deflated or defeated to hear that when they're excited about something, a plan or idea that they already had. And I know I experienced that.
Yeah.
So like I, it really helped me to reflect on my behavior in those moments,
Yeah.
to say other people have good ideas too.
And honestly, that's my default as well. I'm like, soon as I'm a great gap finder and fix it. Like, okay, I hear the gap, bam, here's the fix, or here's some things that we can backwards plan. Have you thought of this? Let's strategize this. And it's like, oh, I just wanted to tell you. It's like, oh, I already thought of a plan. I'm like, oh. So now I've had to I have to be really intentional in conversation to say, before we go further, let me know what my lens for this is. Are you looking for my advice? Are you looking for me to just listen? Or like, and season one, I also did a talk about giving people the space. And that was really about like, allowing people to be able to say if they're willing to even participate in the conversation. Let's start there. So it's like, if somebody says, well, I want to argue, and you're like, actually, I don't. So I respectfully decline to be able to operate in that space. And so I love that that you were reflecting on that. So in your personal experience, which is extensive with the background of therapy and military and the things that you're doing in your business, and so that span of yourself professionally and personally. I would love to hear your story where you can share an experience where you felt supported in your leadership in any capacity.
Yeah, so this was some mental exercise for me to go through this. Um, and feeling supported in general is something I have a tough time with. And it's not because the support is not there. It's just because when I'm in those moments, I don't recognize it for what it is. And my default setting for myself is to say that like I have to do everything on my own or I have to
Mm.
accomplish it by myself. And so the idea of feeling supported is it I don't feel it when it's happening.
Right.
Um, but when I reflect on those things, I think about, and it mostly comes from military experience. Um, when I was in high school, my JROTC instructor made me responsible for developing fundraising strategies for our program.
Wow.
and it was kind of like, whatever you want to do, we'll do whatever whatever you think is a good idea. And so I did some research, and I asked around about other fundraisers that other programs were doing, and I found out that a lot of the ones that people did not actually make money. And so I was like, okay, well, how do we actually raise funds? And so I came up with that idea to use the concession area for games, for the basketball games, because it was inside during lunch periods, to sell candy, and we call them pop where I'm from, but candy and pop.
I call it, we were calling
Uh,
them pop too from where I'm from.
and he was just kind of like, so what do we need? And he was behind me with everything. He helped me fill in the holes, like, if we're gonna do this. And instead of, what I would do is, the recommendations and suggestions, he just asked me questions like, well, how do we keep account for the money that we raise? How do we compensate, or how do we prevent people from taking things? It was one of the questions. um, and so I had to think and figure all of these things out because of the questions that he asked. And he leveraged his, authority as a teacher in the school, to get meetings with the principal for all of their requests and all of, and I didn't recognize that as anything special when I was in high school. This is a part of this class. And the story, I would go back to my high school after I graduated, and he would always be like, "Oh, she's the one that started the candy store," because the candy store was
Aw.
still running. And so, and he would always, like, gloat and all of those things, or dote all over me when I was there. But then at the time, I didn't think that was anything different or special until I look back, and I was like, I created a whole thing, a whole
Right.
functional thing, not just a project on a board, but a whole actual functional thing when I was 16. Um, and I didn't think about like how he poured into me and how he guided me and how he leaded me through that process, and even his faith and trust in my ability to accomplish it. I didn't think about any of that at the time. And it wasn't until I was much older to say, like, this was really pivotal in the way that I thought and approached, I guess, creation.
Wow.
Just with starting businesses and things like that. The key, that was the start of it all, of me thinking differently. With
Yeah.
was with him.
I think that that is amazing when I hear like a teacher, backgrounds my teaching. So when I hear a teacher utilizing and leveraging their teaching experience and their knowledge to pull out greatness from someone else, I get so excited about that, and like tapping into that person's unconscious incompetencies in a way that validates them, empowers them, and not makes them feel insufficient, I think is phenomenal. And that's one of the resounding things that I heard you experience during that supportive time, and I love it. I love it. And so one of the major goals of the podcast is for people to see themselves in those that I'm talking with, and whether that's see themselves physically or in a situational seeing themselves or hearing an experience and different things like that. And so I think that that is an experience that one would resound for me as a teacher, like, oh, okay, our work is not in vain, hearing something like that. And so we have to look at both sides of the coin, right? And so there's a time when we felt supported, and we learn and grow and be nurtured from that. And then there's times when we don't, and then we have to reflect on that. And so I would love for you to dive into the areas of maybe a time where your experience or a time in your leadership where you didn't feel supported, and what are some things that you may have pulled from that that could have happened to make you feel supported.
Yeah. Yeah. And so going here is definitely a lot easier of the times where I didn't feel supported. And and sometimes the me not feeling supported is not necessarily anything that anybody's doing. Sometimes, oh, a lot of times I feel like I'm just out here by myself. I'm just ignored or left to it. And one time that I can think of that I have to go back a little bit to explain it. So I thought about several different times where I felt that way, but then because I know that about myself, like that default setting that I have to like look back at those times with a different lens to make sure that it wasn't that default lens that made me feel that way versus the reality of the situation. And a lot of the times I did look back and I felt like, well, this could have been something else, or their intentions could have been something different. But because I typically felt that way, it felt like you're not supporting me. It felt like that at the time. And so thinking about times where I didn't feel supported, and then also recognizing that, about myself, there was only actually one time that stood out to me clearly. And that was my start as a mental health professional. Now, I had a rough start leaving military life, into transitioning into civilian sector. It was rough. It was a rough a big cultural difference. I I remember the first interview that I had, and they asked me, "What would you do if your supervisor told you to do something and you didn't agree with it?" And my brain exploded with that question because I didn't understand why that was a question. It's like, well, if it's not illegal or immoral, you just do it. Like there are options for this. I know I just stared at him because I really couldn't understand what he wanted me to say for that answer, or what how is there more than one correct answer to this,
Wow.
for it to be a question. So I really did not understand the civilian professional culture, like
Wow.
transitioning out, and it was a really different language to learn and a lot of other things. So this being my first job as a professional outside of the military, and working for a nonprofit, and we have a mission and all of these things, right? Like some things that I felt like I was used to. And I get I get a job with all of this list of things that you must accomplish to do the job. And then I get into the job and I'm like, there's no way possible I can do this. Like, there's no way. And so I'm telling my supervisor, like, hey, like something's wrong. What am I doing wrong? Was the questions that I'm asking. And I was told to talk to another person to ask them, like, how, this person's doing it. How do they do it? And then I talked to that person, and they said, like, on paper, they didn't say these words, but this is what I gather from this situation. On paper, it looks like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but
Oh,
truly,
wow.
these are the things that I'm doing. And so I was told things like I'll go to a kid's soccer game or their basketball game and count that as like face-to-face hours,
Oh,
and
wow.
then do work like case management work for another client while I'm there. And I'm like, that first, that's not legal. You- but that's not the answer. And
Right.
then if our goal, and we have a mission, and this mission is for these kids to get better, how is that leading to the mission? Like, it's checking the boxes, but we're
Mhm.
not going to accomplish the mission doing it that way. And where I grew up, and my professionally, I will always place the mission first. Is our first ethos. It's the first thing. Like, you
Right.
learn that, and it's put in you. And so if I have a mission, and we're the things that you're asking me to do is not accomplish the mission, then what are we doing?
I love
And
it.
so I created spreadsheets, and like, hey, broke all of this thing down, all of these things down. Like, hey, this is what you're asking. This is the time that it takes to do each of these things. And this is the amount of hours in a week. Like, help me. I want to do it, but help me understand how. Help me understand how the right way. And people would pass me off. My manager passed me off to the director, and the director told me, and I will quote her. She said, "That's just the nature of the service,"
Ooh.
and that was what she said. And I was just like, so this, you're telling me, because if it's the nature of the service, you're telling me not only do you not believe that there's nothing can be done, but you're not even attempting to address it, because you've written it off as, well, this is just how it is. And so then I'm like, well, let me talk to somebody different. And then I got to somebody's office that seemed like they cared, but they just wrote down my concerns, and then that was it. I didn't hear anything else about it. And I was like, I love what I'm doing, but I cannot be here. Like, I cannot be a
Mhm.
part of this. And so out of that was really what started our agency. It's just
Mhm.
because I want to do that. I want to do that work, but in a way where it makes sense, or it has purpose, and
Right.
not just me working with no results. Like, what good is that? I'm just working and not getting any results. So,
Yeah. The one stamping thing that you said, I think is, I want to echo that, is if you're not addressing any, these weren't your words word by word, but what I heard was, if you're not focused on the mission, then what is the point? Like, I think that is just so powerful just in life. And one of the things I say about being a leader is, if you woke up this morning, you're a leader because you have to guide and lead yourself. And so there needs to be a mission for your life. There needs to be a mission for what you're doing. And if you're not focused on that mission, then what's the point? And so, like you said, when organizations have missions that we're going to do this, but in the background, you're just checking boxes or just getting by, then one, you have no realistic expectation. They're very unrealistic. They're very unattainable, because all the things that you say you're going to do look great on paper, to say these are the things that align with the mission. All right, so are you doing them? Oh, I'm just checking the things to make it seem like it's happening so our organization functions. Then you're not really being an impactful leader in an impactful organization, because there's nothing, you're not doing anything, you're not impacting lives according to your mission. So I love that. If you're not focused on the mission, then what is the point? Then you need to rewrite your mission, right?
right.
And I love that kind of leads us into the next space. But I want to kind of take a step back before I step forward there, because when I say it leads us to the next space, that was kind of what propelled you into starting Facts Initiative,
Yeah.
right? But
Yep.
before we go there, I want to step back just for a second and say, like, throughout the course of your experience, both where you felt you were supported after you reflected on the things that identify as support for you, and in a space where you didn't feel supported, as the things that felt like that identified as a lack of support, just reflecting on that journey of how we are creating nurturing environments. What do you believe are like some key steps or actions that leaders can take to truly develop supportive spaces that really help achieve lasting success for the individuals that they're encountering with?
Oh. Um, I definitely think, going back to your conversation with Tyla, is understanding what people need.
Mm,
I have my team is really small, but even we've taken steps to, we've done a lot of personality questionnaires and even like work styles, and strength and weaknesses, and a lot of these things with learning each individual, because what may feel like support for me may not also feel like support for Denise, our client specialist, or anybody else on our team. And so just understanding that about me,
yeah.
even the experiences that I have, that I felt supported. Someone else, like my the our JROTC explanation, like he gave me a lot of autonomy
Hmm.
in that situation, which I thrive with autonomy. I thrive with that. But somebody else may have felt like they weren't supported in that same situation, just because of what they perceive support to be. And so really just understanding your team, and understanding how can I best show up for you,
Right.
and what would make that impactful or effective. And different people just need different things. And so I would definitely say start by understanding who your team is.
Yeah, I love that. Different people need different things. And so, yeah, I love that. I really, 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 really love that. What would be some like takeaways that you would want people to hear from just the overall arching things that you're doing? What would be some like key takeaways from that you feel like they would gain from this conversation?
Um, I think that the lasting, understanding yourself is incredibly important. Understanding how you show up, why you show up the way that you show up as a leader is incredibly important. The things that frustrate you, your pet peeves, just digging into why they are what they are, helps you with your interactions, and even helps you to explain yourself. I start so many sentences off of one thing you should know about me, just to just to help people understand. So when they experience me, because people are experiencing you, when they experience me, they have context, and they're like, Gwen didn't say good morning, but it's not because she's trying to be rude. It's just because her thoughts are already somewhere different. And so I just think understanding yourself helps you navigate life a little bit easier, and helps how people experience you a little bit better. And then applying that same thing to other people.
Right.
Just understanding, getting an understanding of where people are coming from, and not just focusing on their behaviors and making assumptions.
That's
It's
awesome.
incredibly helpful in all aspects of leadership.
I love that. I really love that. I'm gonna jump back to jump forward, and then it's
Okay.
gonna give you a two-part question as I'm thinking, because I'm the same way when it comes to like my mind is already like, and I like at the stop, like stop for a second, or I'm writing down notes, or I tell people I may not be looking you right in your eye because I'm physically seeing the thing that I wrote down that I want to say. But so going back to your experience that you had where you saw gaps, like in the beginning of our conversation, one of the biggest things that you mentioned is like you are a gap finder, like, oh, here's how we can do. And so in that conversation of the space where you were with your first, and I love it that you say civilian setting. I'm like, if you're not in the military, you've never used that phrase, right? But going into your first job in the civilian setting and recognizing those gaps. And then the thing I heard you say is you started creating spreadsheets and trying to operationalize it to like, if it should be working, then it should work. I should be able to see it. Help me write out this path. But in that journey, I felt like I heard you say you've kind of went down a couple of avenues. You went to this person, tried to figure out what's the road that leads me to the success of attaining this mission. And in every aspect, you got a dead end. So then what I heard from there was this was a dead end situation. So therefore I had to create. something that leads to a mission that I'm passionate about, which then leaded you, that's not a word, led you to Facts Initiative. And so the one point that I want to stamp with that is, just in some cases, if that capacity is there or that knowledge is there, as you're going through your life, sometimes you have to create something. And I'm not saying quit your job and do all of those things, but what I am saying is, like Gwen said too, recognizing who you are, how you show up, understanding those things. And sometimes you have to be able to work in recreating some things to make sure that, again, like she said, if you're not reaching for the mission, then what does it matter? And so going to that, where it propelled you to start Facts Initiative, I would love to hear just some information about that whole start. And then, because like I said, it's a two-part question, because the whole focus and my mission is nurturing leaders for lasting success. And that looks in the form of support, and whatever that looks like for that leader, then I want you to also speak about how listeners could support you in what upcoming projects and things, initiatives that you have. And so the floor is yours.
So just getting started was really simple. It was birthed out of that experience. College classmate and I had a conversation like, "Hey, this isn't the way to go with this," and essentially, I think we can do this. So we started. We sat down. We bounced ideas around about names and logos, and then we really just started there. And it was about a year and a half later where I felt like I was at a point where like, well, we can start seeing clients. And I am I am a little bit of, I once I lock into the idea that I'm doing this, then I'm doing it. And so then I made the decision, like, it's time. And so then it was like, well, I need a building and I need these things and I need these things. And I just went on a hunt and I didn't have a kid then. So I just spent all of the time that I wasn't seeing clients, working on this project, finding out what a board is. I've learned so much in the last 6 years. I I didn't know anything about business or running a business or even running a nonprofit, until I started. Until it was like, okay, I found my limit. Now I need to grow in that. So now I need to read and study and learn and research and all of those things. So I have to do it. And so that was just really out of pure willpower is how we actually got started. Um, but and it has taken us a while. And like I said, we're still a small team now. It has taken us a while to figure out as much as we figured out at this point. We're still learning. Every week there's like, hey, we need to adjust this process, or create a new policy for this type of thing.
Right, right.
So we're still growing and we're still developing. But it was just really out of that experience that we've had conversations. And since then we've been able to create our outpatient program, which is an outpatient therapy program, and our community-based program where we connect with other organizations that need mental health support, but they may not have a mental health department. So we're working with women's shelters and homeless shelters, human trafficking organizations, and a lot of different aspects where you think, well, obviously people here have suffered or are suffering, and can use some support. So we do those two things. And even our outpatient program is based on a income-based sliding scale. And
Mm.
so it is philanthropic in its own way as well. and just being able to understand, starting from what we read, that these services could be, and
Mm.
definitely knowing what we don't want it to be, like what we don't want our clients to experience or our clinicians to experience, and we hold those things equally important. That the experience that we create for the clinicians that work for us is also a part of our mission and values, and our vision. And it's written in there because it is important that we have healthy, supported professionals providing services, or our clients will not get help. And I really don't even remember the question anymore, Tawana.
That's okay. I'll repeat it. I just want to stamp that, like, talk about writing the vision and making it plain. Um, and now at the point of where you can say starting was easy, but I'm sure when you was in there, it's like, wait, hold on, all the things. But now you can get to that point, and I just want to really celebrate you in taking your experience that you had to create something that you saw was a need in that. And I want to encourage anyone that's listening that when you're in a situation and you feel like something is not right, investigate that, because, oftentimes you'll feel that's your tug and your pull, like, I need to make a change. And I know this is not a sermon podcast, but I am who I am all the time. And I do believe that God gives you a divine agitation. And in that agitation means that it's something that is calling you towards your purpose. And so I commend you really for showing up for that agitation. Like, hey, these roads are not ending up where you say they need to be. So I need to create a street for that. And so I appreciate that. And it's so needed what you're doing. Like, it was always needed, but I think, COVID obviously has been like, hey, we need mental health support. Like, duh. Right? But so I want to know, like, what you mentioned, some great things and some spaces that you all show up in when it comes to women. And I know that I've been to an event of yours, and a lot of your focus is also on trauma, which is really important as well. But I would love for the listeners to know about any upcoming projects or events or initiatives that you have coming up in the near future, that people can support and show up and learn about.
Yeah. So we are in the process of expanding our community partnership program. So we're adding a few more partners with that, and with that is the need to grow our team. And so that is really our biggest focus, is growing our team. We're looking for new clinicians. We're actually preparing to hire an executive director. Now, let me pause myself. When I say preparing to hire, I mean we're writing the job description, we're doing all of the administrative part. So we don't have a person lined up for that position, but we're preparing our organization to have that position, which I think is gonna be I can't even describe the amount of change that they'll create when your clinicians can focus on all the clinical parts of the organization and have an ED, focus on marketing and all of those other things. That's a whole nother conversation. But I have a lot of thoughts about why that's such a good thing.
Yeah.
Um, but with that growth, we're definitely looking into things in the next 2 to 5 years with getting a building. Right now, we're in an awesome space, the Brooklyn Collective uptown, and our where we see ourselves going. We won't be able to be housed there too much longer.
Right.
So we're looking into creating a building space, we're going to start fundraising for that initiative in June.
Okay.
And so because it is a project that will take some time and some equity and some energy, we're going to start planning and preparing for it right away.
Awesome. And so, how can others support you, as far as, like, go ahead and list out your email, your Insta, your LinkedIn, wherever ways people can follow you so that they can keep up with the things that are happening, and be able to show up and support in those spaces?
We are at the Facts Initiative anywhere you look for us. And you can send us an email at info at the Facts Initiative. If you Google us, all of our information is there. But Instagram, Facebook, you can find us at the Facts Initiative.
Awesome. And those links will also be in the comments of every listening space, Spotify, Apple listening, and YouTube. Gwen, I want to thank you so much. And I'm so honored that you agreed to give me some time on your calendar to have this conversation and share yourself and allow others to experience yourself. I love that phrase that you said, you're allowing others to experience you. And so I appreciate this experience that I've had with you. And I am just excited about those who are also going to be able to experience this as well. Any last words that you have?
Thank you for the opportunity. I enjoy watching your podcast and learning from the guests that you have and from you. I definitely think the road to being a great leader is that continuously developing and learning, because you never arrive. So thank you for the content that you put out.
Thank you. Again, I appreciate it. And thank you all for listening.